Viemos a Londres entrevistar a mais famosa crítica de vinhos mundial, Jancis Robinson. Mais palavras para quê? Venha conhecê-la. Hello, Jason. Thank you for receiving us here in London.
Pleasure.
It's a pleasure and an honor. In 1999, you wrote a book called Jancis Robinson Tastes the Best Portuguese Table Wines. What do you think about Portuguese wine since then?
Portuguese wine quality has gone up quite a lot since then, and it's much more sophisticated now. It's quite unusual for me anyway to come across any rustic Portuguese wine outside that I see in my tastings. But of course the trouble is wine quality has increased everywhere else as well, so it's not really the case that relative to everywhere else, Portugal has leapfrogged other countries. It's still, I'd say, more or less in the same place relative to everyone else. Maybe it's advanced a few places, but poor Portuguese wine producers. In fact, it's not just Portuguese wine producers. Wine producers around the world have to keep getting better to stay still. If you see what I mean, yeah.
But what do you think about the future of Portuguese wines? Do you think they have to be more aggressive in marketing? Do you think the producers have to do more? What do you think it's more?
I think the fundamental problem for the image of Portuguese wine among foreigners, among non-Portuguese, apart obviously from little pockets of fanatics around the world and knowledge of people who are wine drinkers who are knowledgeable about Portuguese wines, is that people tend to think Portuguese wine is either very cheap and not very interesting, or has to be cheap. And then there's a kind of quite a big gulf and gap, and then there are a few high-profile wines, such as Barcavelli, I suppose, which are famous. Or some of the more successful Douro wines in particular, which seem relatively expensive to outsiders who don't perhaps know that much about them, or they haven't really established a reputation outside Portugal. And again, that's not actually a problem which is exclusive to Portugal, because it seems to me around the world, I think perhaps of countries like Hungary or Greece or somewhere like that, or to a certain extent Spain, where for a long time internationally they were not seen as very exciting wine producers, and then towards the end of the last century quality increased enormously, or in the case of Hungary perhaps more recently, and suddenly the locals, the Portuguese, the Greeks, the Hungarians, suddenly realised that their country was making some exciting wine, and so the most patriotic and richest of the locals were prepared to pay a very high price for the best wines from their country. So that automatically puts the price of the top wines quite high, and which you're prepared to pay if you're living in that country. Yes. But abroad, and when you have a choice of buying a world famous Bordeaux, which may be quite boring, but at least you can. There's a secondary market for it. If you don't like it, you can sell it to somebody else. It takes quite a big leap to turn your back on these very well established names and decide to invest a lot of money in what's a relatively unknown quantity. And so I think from my point of view, Portugal needs to be offering a bit more wine in the middle.
They need to invest in education in other countries or not?
Well, well done generic promotion never does any harm. I never ever suggest anyone spends any money on generic advertising. I don't think that makes anybody pick up a bottle. I've seen so much money wasted on generic advertising. Tastings are very good, and a good presence at consumer wine fairs as well. I mean, you've got to get people tasting it. That's the number one thing. I'd say the level of knowledge among British wine writers about Portuguese wine is not bad, actually. And there is a lot of enthusiasm for Portuguese wine among the small, tight-knit group of us who write about wine. I'm just not sure how you communicate that to the public. I mean, you can do promotions with retailers, which many countries do.
Specific.
Yes, very specific. And, have a special special month, 2 months, when there's, buy 2 bottles of Portuguese wine and you get X% off. That can help. Yes, yeah. But I think establishing the fact that there are some seriously good Portuguese wines selling between, say, £5 or £6 and £12 to £15 a bottle would be very, very useful. You can get some supermarket own label Douro, just straightforward Douro without a brand name, for about £8, and that's the sort of wine I think that's going to make friends.
The middle price.
Yes, but it's got to be good.
Yes. Of course. Yeah. I know that you went recently to Madeira.
Yes.
It's a small world, we all know. But what do you think about the Madeira wines, and what the future, because they are rare?
Yes, but there again, quality is going up so substantially, and I felt a sort of new. I'd only been to Madeira once before, which was, I think, could have been 2002. I can't remember. It was a few years ago. Anyway, there seemed to be much more energy in Madeira, more youth and ambition, and looking ahead as well as looking behind at the great old treasures, and a few really talented winemakers in important places coming up with wines that were not slick marketing constructs, but were really founded on top quality.
Which are the Portuguese grape you think have more potential?
Well, you've got so many.
Thank you.
It's very, very difficult to pick out one. I suppose Touriga Nacional has already made the first steps to being internationally famous, and so it probably is sensible to build on that, because it's very easy to take it. It's got a strong personality, and find other producers who say, yes, but you should try our Barga or Tinta Touriga Franca or whatever, and get people on from Touriga Nacional. But I think that is a good first step.
But do you think the future is also to mix the Portuguese grapes with the international grapes, or only the Portuguese grape with Portuguese grapes?
I don't think there's any need anymore to introduce people to a an unfamiliar grape by blending it with a familiar grape. I think the consumers moved on from that. There was a time, certainly in the 90s, when if a white didn't have Chardonnay on the label and a red didn't have Cabernet or Merlot, you couldn't sell it. But certainly in this market, people are very adventurous. They almost want new stimulation all the time, and even looking in the big supermarkets, which unfortunately are responsible for selling 3/4 of the wine retailed in this country, you'll see a very, very wide variety of grape varieties, and I don't think it's necessary to blend unless it's for quality reasons.
So you bet in the Portuguese grapes?
Very much so, definitely. And I think more and more unusual grape varieties are being recognised as a positive asset by even some quite timid wine drinkers.
Okay.
In this country, anyway.
Yes. Portuguese producers and winemakers around the world follow your work. Forget you are one of the most influent critics in the world, and that France is the great wine producer. Which are your preferences? Red or white wines? Fortified wines? Young or old wines? New or old wines?
Honestly, I know it sounds pathetic, but I really don't have general preferences. I can see that my husband usually prefers red wine, but I don't even usually prefer red or white. I just think it's magical that we've got this fruit whose fermented juice produces such a wide variety of colours, styles, sweetness levels, whatever. And I really do. I love white wine. I love red wine. There are times when a fortified wine is great, and there are some wonderful fortified wines. And
depends on the occasion.
Yes, and it depends on the wine. Yes, but it's more important to have a really interesting example rather than to go for just one particular style. I'm sorry, that's a boring question, but it's the truth.
I understand. Now the new tendencies. What do you think about biological wines around the world, not only in Portugal?
What we call organic wines, yeah. For the good of the planet, I'm very pleased if we use less and less agrochemicals. I know that that's a very good thing and that all farmers ought to be aiming to be more and more sustainable. I don't think that blind I can tell whether a wine has been made biologically or not. I do think very often I can tell whether a wine has been made biodynamically or not, with these very extreme ways of growing vines where, you literally bury dried nettles in cow horns when the moon is rising. Things that sound completely crazy.
We also have that in Portugal.
Yes, yeah. Well, and of course quite a lot of producers are rather ashamed of doing it because it sounds crazy. And it may not be the actual process that makes the wine taste so good. It may just be that the rules of biodynamics are so strict that the farmers have attention to each vine that the result is inevitably going to be a very, very good wine. Whether they'd buried nettles or camomiles and whether they buried it in that corner or that corner, it may just be that it's an extra level of care. But you have to admit, and there may be no rational explanation, but you have to admit that biodynamically cultivated vines look different. They look healthier. They grow in a different way, and the wines seem to me to have more life and a bit more energy, and sometimes taste sort of a little bit wild when they're young. But they're alive, and they are then to be good wines.
Very interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what
sometimes a bit extreme, but then it would be very boring if all wine were middle of the road.
What do you think about the climatic changes?
I'm not sure that Portugal is an obvious beneficiary of global warming. Germany and Canada are, and England, and Tasmania, perhaps. But other than that, I would think that regions like Alentejo are probably quite worried about climate change, I would think. And presumably...
What regions, it's worst?
Yes. I mean, do Portuguese wine regions have enough water, all of them?
No, all of them.
And Doura's had some real suffering.
Yes, Douro, Alentejo, Algarve, some regions can suffer with that.
Yeah.
And around the world, I think it's the same, the hot countries. But
mind you, because you have quite a lot of indigenous grape varieties that are very good at coping with quite dry summers.
Yes, depend on the grape too.
Yes. That may help to spread Portuguese grape varieties around the world. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if more and more growers in, say, Australia, California, are growing more and more, perhaps, port grapes, knowing that those grapes can survive in a way that some of the grapes that they used to grow will not. So you know, I don't think Portugal should be selfish about its grape varieties. I think it's very, very good for the reputation of Portuguese wine. The more growers around the world experiment with Portuguese varieties.
Yes, who knows the results? We have to try. What is for you the perfect wine? What is the characteristics of the perfect wine?
I think balance is the most important. Balance and subtlety. And I have been asked often enough, you know, what's the best wine you've ever had? So I've developed an answer. It's better than saying I have an answer. I've developed an answer, which illustrates really how varied wine can be, and it varies from bottle to bottle. And I've been lucky enough to taste this very famous wine, Chateau Cheval Blanc, 1947, Saint-Emilion, really quite a few times. And it's also a wine that's so famous that I think it's been faked quite a bit. And I've been lucky enough to have one particular magnum and one particular bottle that were just absolutely stunning. But the others were not as good. So my point is that it's not wonderful wines, it's wonderful bottles. And no one should be surprised that wine varies a lot from bottle to bottle. I mean, on my website I give tasting notes, not per wine, but per bottle. You know, so I might have 6 tasting notes on the same wine. And sometimes some of my subscribers get very cross because I've given them the wine a different mark on different occasions. But for me, that's the reality. A, wines vary during their life, and B, different bottles differ as well.
Okay, thank you. But this I have to ask you. What was the most expensive bottle that you buy? Do you agree with the prices of top Bordeaux and Burgundy wines, for example?
Well, I have to admit I have bought some first growth 2005 Bordeaux, but I don't think I'll be buying I won't be buying 2009s. They've just gone. Well, they haven't been announced yet, but I'm pretty certain they're out of my bracket. But we come back to my first point of, I feel I can justify spending a lot of money on a top famous Bordeaux because there is always a market for selling it afterwards. But the market for selling a top quality Portuguese afterwards is not established, so I can't justify it to myself as much. In fact, I don't sell wine, I keep it all. But it's the thought in the back of your mind that whether you in theory could resell it.
Okay. How many wines do you taste per week or per month?
Well, I think I reckoned it was about 10,000 a year. So I don't know what that is. Sometimes it's 100 a day, but I don't like tasting 100 a day. But I'd have. But then, if someone asked me to a tasting that was a long way away and there were only 12 wines, they'd have to be 12 very good wines for me to feel it was worth making the journey.
Okay, you travel a lot, your life must be in movement, but how is a normal day for you? And how can you manage your familiar life and professional life?
Well,
please tell me this secret, because I want to follow.
It is very difficult, and at the moment, I start my day, very sad character, I start my day with my laptop in bed, updating my website. Now, and I can sometimes spend several hours doing that, and I couldn't have done that when my children were small. So it's lucky that my website started 10 years ago when my youngest was already 9, and the oldest was 18. So that wasn't so difficult, but I don't see how. I think to have young children and keep a website going must be very, very difficult. So before then, I was lucky because my husband also is self-employed and works from home. So there was always one of us at home, and so if I travelled, and it was usually me, then at least he was here. So that was a big help, I must say. Yeah.
To finish this interview, I asked some producers to ask you some questions. So I have this paper and I will read it for you. Filipa Pato from Bairrada, she's a winemaker and wine producer. Filipa is a fan of Old Muscatéis. Have you ever tasted Old Muscatéis? If not, would you like to taste? She asks.
Yes, please. How old does she mean? But how old is she talking about, do you think?
20, 30.
20, 30-year-old Muscatel? No, I've never tasted wine. From which region? From Bairrada.
Yes.
Oh, right. No,
not Bairrada. Bairrada don't have Muscatéis.
Yes, no, I'd love to taste those old wines, yeah. Yes.
Would you like? Yeah.
Give her my address. Yeah.
Pedro Araújo from Vinhos Verdes region, he's a wine producer, ask you, what do you think is the best promotion for Portuguese wines? What do you think it's missing to be in fashion?
Probably the fact that Portugal doesn't have a very strong... I'm being inspired to answer in a different way because of the region he's from. The fact that Portugal doesn't have a very, very strong gastronomic identity doesn't help. You know, with Spanish food, it's got has a very strong image, and there are lots of dishes that people immediately think of. It's more complicated for Portugal, isn't it? It's not that you haven't got some very good food, but internationally, if you said to someone on the street in New York or London, okay, what Portuguese food can you think of?
Do you think it's the combination between food and wine can be a solution?
I think it can really, really help. I mean, after all, such a high proportion of wine is drunk with food. And the Spaniards have been quite clever at promoting food we've now got lots and lots of tapas bars, for instance, which are helping the sales of Spanish wine. So I don't know that people would even think of bacalao or something. I just think most of them would be quite puzzled.
You have to go again to Portugal and to taste the new food that we have there and new restaurants.
Yes. Well, perhaps that's part of the answer. Perhaps they need to be promoted a bit more outside Portugal.
Yeah,
it does help. The travelling chefs help enormously, and there is now an international network. There are events all around the world crying out for some new chefs to bring some new ideas. So
people have to travel.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh yes, and
travel a lot.
Yeah, and they do. And every wine region and wine country needs characters. I mean, that's what's held Germany back a lot. I think that really, apart from Ernie Lozen, there's very, very few well-known German wine producers. Egon Müller a bit, but everyone knows the name, but he's a very quiet chap. Now we see Filipa's father, Luis Pato. I never know how you pronounce his name. A bit. He comes to England a bit, so good for him.
He travels a lot.
Yes. And we sometimes see David Baverstock from Esperão, but of course he's kind of a slightly Australian image rather than Portuguese.
Now he's Portuguese.
Okay,
it told me. Okay. Now he's Portuguese.
I once asked him, when are you going to start using screw caps? And he gave me a very strange look. And then, of course, there's the very good promotion, the Douro Boys, which we have here. I don't know if they go around the world or if it's just a thing in Britain.
No, they travel.
Yeah. But that helps, because those wines are absolutely perfect for the British palate. You know, they follow on from Red Bordeaux in structure, but with a bit more spice and interest. So that works very, very well.
Okay. Jaime Candera, winemaker from Peninsula de Setúbal region, as you know, you have two styles. The new world with soft and alcoholic wines, and the old world with more structure and terroir. In the long term, what do you think it's better? It's the better style for Portuguese producers?
Well, I think Portuguese producers have such great, interesting regions. I mean, there isn't really a great big industrial... you don't have an equivalent of the Central Valley in California, for instance, or the irrigated riverlands of Australia. you're, apart with one or two exceptions, you're mainly vines are grown in a place with a lot of character, and you'd be mad not to express that character. Yeah, I mean, if you look at the old downs, I mean, way back, the sort of things that, you know, literally from the 70s and 80s, they were really old-fashioned and often very rustic and tough, and, you know, the perfect thing is to make the most of Dow's natural resources, but going a little way to meet the consumer, to make the wines attractive to drink. And it is sadly no good building a whole region on wines that you have to wait for 20 years for. You have got to have wines that people can drink, certainly at 5 years old. Some wines, anyway, to open the doors. But it would be mad, I think, if everyone in Portugal said, oh, we'd better make copies of Australian fruit-forward Shiraz. I mean, they're not doing so well, are they? So,
Mário Sérgio, wine producers from Bairrada region, asks you, what do you think about Bairrada region and about Baga grape?
Ah, right. Well, I've been following that over the years, and there again, you see, it's a grape with very, very strong personality, but that has over the years been gradually tamed a little bit to make it a little bit easier for non-Portuguese palates, and I think that's great. I think it's at a very good state now. Yeah, it's just. But I think you've got to keep it reasonably pure. I don't think Baga Cabernet Sauvignon is the way to go. Yeah.
That's the terroir that we are talking about. Rui Reguinga, wine producer and winemaker from Alentejo and Ribatejo region, asks you: do you think that that consumer will pay more, a bigger price for the drink? To drink the organic wines?
I don't think... I mean, there are so many wines now made effectively organically that don't advertise the fact on the label. And, in fact,
people drink and don't know.
Yes. And in my experience, pretty much the only wines that make a big thing of being organic are those that are quite cheap and are probably the worst sort of organic wines, and so the only basis they have to sell themselves is the fact they're organic. So I'd be a little bit suspicious of a wine that was too that marketed itself too much on being organic. Mm-hmm. And I do firmly believe that soon most wines will be sustainable, if not organic, so it's not going to be much of a unique selling point for long.
Last question. Bernardo Cabral, winemaker from Alentejo region, asks you: do you think that alcoholic wines can be balanced?
Yes, I do. I mean, you know, we only have to look at
There's a problem with alcohol, as you know.
Yes, but and I think in theory I like drinking wine. I love the taste of wine, so the more mouthfuls of wine that I can have, the happier I am. Therefore, a lower alcohol wine is likely to be more convenient for me. But there is one very important wine that we haven't mentioned yet, which of course is port. And, you know, the quality of port, we've been talking about the quality of table wine perhaps, but the quality of port has just gone soaring through the roof. So it's terribly well made from the right stables nowadays. And of course, the best port is beautifully balanced and is some of the most alcoholic wine that there is. Mm-hmm. There are also some pretty alcoholic table wines from Portugal. They can be balanced, certainly, definitely, and I know all sorts of table wines that are 15% natural alcohol, no added alcohol, and are beautifully balanced. It's just that we've just got to be careful when we drink them. Yes.
Okay. Jancis, thank you once more for receiving us. And I hope you can have some time to visit Portugal
again.
with more time again to see the difference that we have now and the good wines.
Yes, no. I know that you have some fantastic wines, and I'd just like to slow down my calendar and extend it to, if I can get something like 36 months in a year, that would be great.
Thank you very much once more. Thanks.